And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 62nd episode of the Hoosier Sound. We are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, November 13th, where I am your host, Noah Freeman, and here with me tonight is my usual co host, Matthew Lukens. Oh, if you're watching on the live stream, he is not here with me. And this is where I'd like to introduce my new guest for tonight, Nathan Krishnan. He is a contributor on Indiana HQ. So how's it going tonight, Nathan?
It's good, Noah. Thanks for having me on. I feel like Archie Miller's called me on from the bench here because our starting point guard is unable to play tonight. So
yeah. There we go.
So I'm glad to join the podcast here. Indiana HQ is just getting started, and hopefully we have a few minutes, or however long you want, of talking about IU sports.
Yeah, let's do it. But if you want to see us live and participate in the ongoing chat, catch us Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. on our YouTube page or our website. If you miss us live for broadcasts, you can subscribe to our show for free on whatever platform you listen to podcasts, so you can listen on your own time. Check out our Twitter and Facebook at The Hoosier Sound and subscribe. All of our information is in our website, thehoosiersound.com, as well as our partner, Indiana HQ, at indianahq.com. All right, Hoosier Nation, it is time for some sports talk. But first, Nathan, we're going to do the memorable monologue over your way. So what is your memorable monologue for this week in IU sports?
Well, even I know everyone's focused on basketball right now. Obviously, a couple of big games coming up this week. But for me, it's Logan Justice's game-winning field goal in the last minute of that football game on Saturday. The youngster hasn't really been called on too much this year, especially from longer distances. So for him to connect from, I think it was 42 yards out to win that game against Maryland on Saturday was awesome, and the Hoosiers got the last stop to win the game. So I guess my moment would be the game-winning field goal on Saturday to beat Maryland. A Big Ten win, can never complain about that.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the season, we wanted Maryland to be an easier win, and by the middle of the season, it was looking a little rocky. But at least we're going to talk about Maryland in a second. But yes, I agree. We got to see a game-winning field goal, especially from, like you said, more of a younger guy, at least a younger guy on the team. And it's always good when your kicker is kicking game-winning field goals instead of missing stuff, no matter what team or what level you're on for football.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. My NFL team that I root for, the Bears, just had Cody Parkey hit 4 kicks off the uprights on Sunday. So funny how the college kicker that I root for was able to knock one in from 42 yards out.
Exactly, yeah, and more pressure too. Well, yeah. I don't know, yeah. I'm going to go over to swimming and diving. That's the first time in a little while that we've talked about swimming and diving, because this past weekend we had the Big Ten ACC Challenge. Yeah, it happens in more than just basketball. So we got the Big Ten ACC Challenge. We got 13 Hoosiers that represented Indiana at the Big Ten ACC Challenge. And thankfully enough, both the men and the women's events swept the ACC. So the Big Ten got a W. A lot of the Hoosiers helped out with that without going into too many stats. But then, of course, men's soccer. Everyone already knows a lot of the news that we won the Big Ten tournament. We got the double, winning the season and winning the tournament on Sunday. The NCAA selection show was yesterday, and Indiana did not get the number 1 overall seed, which is a little bit of controversy, which is too much to get into now. But they did at least get the number 2 overall seed, and they will play either UConn or Rhode Island this Sunday, now at 12 o'clock p.m. It was a little later at 1, but now it's at 12. And if they win, they would potentially play number 15 Denver in the round after that. Let's move into a Maryland recap. So let's start a little bit with, but before we start actually with the offense, Nathan, what were your some of your takeaways, just general knee-jerk reactions from the Maryland game this past Saturday?
Yeah, just real quick on the soccer thing, by the way, that game's going to be on Big Ten Network for those of you that have that. So if you're unable to get down to Bloomington, you can just watch that, pop it on your television instead of your boring Sunday football. So as far as the Maryland football game goes on Saturday, I think the overarching theme is a conference win is a conference win. You're never going to be annoyed by that. I know it wasn't pretty or perfect, but doesn't matter. Yeah, and especially when you consider the ramifications for a potential postseason game, IU needed to have this one, given that they are expected to fall this coming weekend. You have your toss-up game against Purdue to end the season. So, especially, and look, they overcame some adversity there. It showed a lot of their internal fortitude to give up that game-winning or go-ahead touchdown and late in the fourth quarter, but then they came right back, took the lead on the field goal from Justice, and then got the stop to end the game. So I liked what I saw overall. I was very happy that it seemed like the Hoosier offense opened up a little bit more. It looked like Peyton Ramsey was very focused on getting the ball deep as long as he had the protection, the time to throw. And that seemed to do is open up the running lanes. So all in all, I think the main headline from that IU win, outside of actually winning the game, was Peyton Ramsey's perhaps newfound desire to throw the ball down the field to Hale and Westbrook, among other guys.
Yeah. Well, that's even a little bit controversial too, because I don't know about if it's his desire just more than the play calling being given it towards him, and like which is also a little puzzling that I don't want to get into too much. I know Crimson Cast had a great conversation about this last time, but if he's able to do that, why didn't we start doing that earlier in the season? But I'm going to echo a lot of what you said. It was kind of a you texted me this earlier. It was it was a roller coaster game because you got the first quarter. It was a terrible first quarter. I came into the game a little late, but I recorded it and then caught back up, and I was like, oh man, do I want to sit through all of this? We had 2 punts the entire first quarter, and we had a total of 2 minutes and 45 seconds of overall possession time. We had the ball for under 3 minutes in the entire first quarter. But then it changed to the second quarter. We got a great second quarter, rattled off 3 touchdowns. We kind of had an third quarter, I would say, just because really they did outscore Maryland 10-7, but we punted a couple times. Maryland got a touchdown, but we still could never put together a really long drive. And then the fourth quarter wasn't the best until they did get that game-sealing drive with that field goal when it really mattered the most. And even though it wasn't the best fourth quarter, like you said, they got it when it mattered. They kicked the field goal. They got the turnover. They sealed the game because it's, and we're going to get into this in a second, but it was really, I thought it was really interesting, especially from the offensive perspective. So let's segue into the offense a little bit. Sure. It was, out of the entire game, we had the ball just about 20 minutes compared to Maryland's 40, which is extremely on the odd, like the odd ends of the spectrum. Usually a low game is even 24, 25 minutes of possession. IU never put together a drive longer than, I think it was 3 minutes and 34 seconds was the longest drive that Indiana put together. So we scored, what was it, like 34 points, but we only had the ball for 3 minutes and 34 seconds for that, which was our longest drive, which I thought was really interesting. But you have any thoughts about that?
Well, sometimes you see that when the defense is forcing turnovers and you get those short fields. And I think in some of those down quarters, as you mentioned, maybe, while it may have not been a masterpiece or a work of art, I recall off the top of my head some fumbles forced by the defensive line. And the one thing IU has done consistently throughout the year, you might be critical of their offensive game plan or some special teams mistakes. There have been some defensive breakdowns as well, but they have taken the ball away, which, as someone who's watched IU football probably since I started college, about all of 2009, IU's defense has not taken the ball away with this frequency before. So with those shorter fields come those shorter drives. I do think, in hindsight, though, is something to focus on next week and the week after. Tom Allen and Mike DeBoer will want IU's offense to hold the ball, accumulate first downs, move down the field, and instead of having those few punts, convert those punts to field goals or field goals into touchdowns.
Yep, because then on the other side of the ball, it really takes a toll for the defense, because when the defense is out there for 40 minutes, it's hard for them to keep getting stops. And I think they kind of got bailed out, because I'm going to talk about this later. The defense either gave up a score or got a turnover. So it was kind of just a two-headed monster with that in the other way. But let's go into quarterbacks just a little bit. You talked a little bit about Peyton Ramsey finally getting to air the ball out at least more consistently, because even the past few games we saw like 1 or 2 air outs. But this game we saw a few more, and it was nice to see Ramsey actually getting the ball down the field. And at least for me, besides that was a good aspect. I mean, Peyton Ramsey, at least if anything, is consistent. His up and down there's a lot of middle ground, which I mean is a pretty good thing, because at least every single game you're not going to get a terrible outing. You just know you're also not going to get a great outing, which isn't a bad thing. But what else did you see from Peyton this game?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Absolutely, the opening up of the offense was a key there for Ramsey. I thought perhaps his biggest play of the game was the first touchdown that IU scored on Saturday, where he had to move around in the pocket and find an opening. He may have evaded, might have been one, maybe even two defensive linemen, and then he scampered down the field for that touchdown run. And as you mentioned, the first quarter was pretty bad for the Hoosiers, but the defense did hold Maryland to a couple field goals. So there was a drive right there early, or maybe it was middle second quarter, where Ramsey found an opening, ran it in for a 35-yard touchdown, and just like that, IU had a 7-6 lead. And you said, well, things could have been a lot worse, but the Hoosiers had the lead. And hey, look, I'm looking forward to seeing how Ramsey does against Michigan. This IU receiving group was considered, before the regular season started, as one of the best in the conference. And, seeing how Nick Westbrook and Donovan Hale and Luke Timian and Jay-Sean Harris and Ty Freifogel, who emerged on Saturday, seeing how that group does against Michigan secondary will be interesting. I think those guys will have to play at their best if IU has any chance of knocking off Michigan on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, I want to echo what you said again at the beginning of the game. The two field goals were really key. At least they gave up the long drives, but it could have easily been 14-0. And 14-0 is very different than being 6-0, where, like you said, we scored and we were already up just by scoring one touchdown, compared to it seemed like Maryland was pounding all over us, and they were, but at least on the scoreboard, we were able to get it back a little bit. Running backs, I think was it just me, or did it seem like Stevie had kind of an okay game? It didn't seem like he was doing too much to push the Hoosiers down the field. But then again, when you look at the box score, he did run for over 100 yards. He had a touchdown, and he had a breakout run for 27. So was it just me, or did it feel like he was kind of just there, not too much in the forefront, but not too much in the background either?
No, it's funny you mentioned that. I couldn't remember one explosive run he had all game until I just scrolled through, like I said, the stat sheet and the play-by-play from that game on Saturday against the Terrapins. I did not realize until just now, on that game-winning field goal drive that the Hoosiers had to beat Maryland, every single play IU ran was a Stevie Scott run. There was a big 27-yard run to get IU close to field goal range, and then Scott had a few more carries. I think he accumulated about 10 more yards more to get Justice into that low 40-yard range rather than a low 50-yard range. But how rare do you see that? A game-winning drive where every single play is a handoff to the same running back, and it ends up being successful. And I was just looking at Stevie Scott's game by game this year. There was a stretch in the middle of the season, I'm looking at it right now, against Michigan State, Rutgers, Ohio State, and Iowa, where he was struggling to really gain much ground. And I think it was fair to think maybe he was hitting a freshman wall. But how about this? The last 3 weeks against Penn State, Minnesota, and Maryland, 138 yards, 96 yards, and 103 yards. He's eclipsed 5 yards per carry in each of those 3 games, and he scored in each of those 3 games. So I think, if you're looking forward to next year or the year after as a Hoosier fan, Stevie Scott's going to be an extremely interesting prospect. He might even be a dark horse for, a dark horse, but he might be one for, Big Ten running back of the year next year, maybe even beyond. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I guess it wasn't just me that he was kind of, it kind of didn't seem like he was doing too much, at least till the end, which, again, we've kind of, I guess bashed is actually an appropriate word, Mike DeBoard for the play calling, but we had a 5-minute drive. We had 5 minutes, we had the ball and we had 5 minutes to go. What are you going to do? At least if it's going to work, you're going to run the ball. You're going to take the clock down. I think they actually scored a little quicker than they might have wanted to, but then obviously the defense sealed it. But let's go on to wide receivers. I think it was finally nice to see Donovan Hale with 92 yards on 3 catches with a long of 43 and a touchdown. Like I said, it was just nice to see him because he was supposed to be this really explosive wide receiver that we were going to have the entire year, and we just really haven't seen much from him. It's kind of just been average games, and thankfully Ramsey was able to get him the ball this time. But other than that, it was also good to see Freifogel, Timian, and Westbrook. They all had about 40 yards or so. Everyone contributing to the win, but not too much of a standout player except for Hale.
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. Remember, the Hoosiers were shorthanded a little bit at the receiver position on Saturday. Whop Fillier, who emerged sort of in the early part of the season, was not available. But, again, sometimes, not making a big mistake is noteworthy. And I don't recall off the top of my head any important drops. They seem to be effective in the blocking games. Scott did average over 5 yards a carry. So all in all, it was good to see. Again, this is the group that I think is going to have to excel on Saturday for IU to pull off any possible upset in the big house.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go into the defense. I think, like I mentioned just a little earlier, I think it was a good and bad game for them because it was, like I said, they except for 2 punts, it was either they scored or they didn't. And some of the good that, like the first quarter, they did hold them to 2 field goals when they got towards the red zone. But then they either scored or they got some turnovers. They had, I think it was terrible rushing defense. That was the one thing that I don't think anyone can get away for, where 210 yards just for Anthony McFarland, but then 353 total rushing yards for Maryland on the ground last Saturday. I think that part was not good at all.
No, it wasn't. And look, you just have to look at the numbers. Maryland accumulated over 300 yards rushing. That's never going to get it done. I had some issues with, it's funny. I think the majority of IU fans have, if they're going to pick one side of the ball to criticize this year, they might have criticized the offense for the majority of the season. There were some things on defense I was kind of questioning, especially in the first half when Kasim Hill was in at quarterback for Maryland before his serious injury. I was kind of curious why IU didn't load the box more, as they say. I was surprised I didn't see more 7 or 8 guys focusing on the run, trying to stop the run closer to the line of scrimmage. Maybe they wanted to avoid getting beat deep on a pass play. Perhaps that's the logic behind that. But again, you've got to do better. And look, Michigan's going to try to run the ball 70 times on Saturday. So if you don't stop that and you don't force the Wolverines or even the Boilermakers on a couple Saturdays from now, if you don't force them to throw the ball by limiting the run game, it's going to spell trouble.
Yeah, I agree. And then a couple other things that I think the defense should have done better on was they only sacked Maryland's QB once. We haven't had the best defensive line and linebackers, especially compared to recent past, because we've had a lot of graduations and we just lost a lot of players, and it's a younger front. But one sack against Maryland, who doesn't have a great offensive line, isn't the best. And the other point that wasn't the best, before we talk about some of the positive aspects of the defense did give up a 21-6 lead. They were definitely gassed at points, like I said, due to the offense not being on the field for more than 3 minutes and 34 seconds at a time, which even on like the best timeouts and everything and stoppage of clocks, that's like 7 or 8 minutes that they get of rest before they go back out on the field. But it was a 21-6 lead, and that's kind of where you got to put your put the foot on the throat, stop them a couple times, let the offense score once or twice, and then put the game out of reach. But other than that, do you have any other points before we get onto the couple good spots of the defense?
I'm a little bit surprised if we're talking about kind of something that stood out on defense. I was a little bit surprised that in addition to not getting to the quarterback as often, I was surprised that Maryland was able to bring a quarterback off the bench in Tyrell Pigrome, and he was 10 for 13, 146 yards, touchdown, didn't turn it over. And maybe it seems like something to me where it's like, all right, an injury to a quarterback happens, how does our defense adjust? How do we sort of, manipulate things towards this new guy, even though all week we were focusing on the first guy? And that's something, I was a little bit surprised to see how IU's defense seemed to struggle with a new quarterback in the game. But hey, look, end of the day, on the last drive, they do deserve credit. They did force a turnover, ended up winning the game.
Yep, and is it surprising much about IU with their backup quarterback play? Because as Minnesota, the Minnesota game showed, it showed that IU can't even stop a backup quarterback there. But like you said, at the end of the day, they got a turnover, which is the very the one shining moment, the one shining moment. But they have 4 takeaways, including 3 fumble recoveries. So yeah, Maryland was running all over them, but that did cost them because they had 3 turnovers. Honestly, with running over 350 yards, if you're getting 3 possessions off of that, 3 fumble recoveries from some of those, that's a big positive. And an INT, that interception did continue Maryland's active streak of throwing an interception. It's the 3rd longest active streak for that. Just an interesting statistic right there. But they got the turnovers when it mattered. I think they are, what is it? Tied for 3rd in the nation on turnovers, and then 1st in the nation for fumble recovery. So at least in terms of turnovers, this defense can get turnovers.
Absolutely, and I think IU's gotten a takeaway in every game this year, which again, I mean, Hoosier fans know if you went back in time a couple of years, maybe 3 seasons tops, and you told an IU fan that in 2 or 3 years, this IU defense is going to get a takeaway in every single conference game they play in a season, people kind of look at you funny. So, they were able to get the job done. I mean, look, Maryland had one pass play more than 20 yards all day on Saturday. So, I mean, it came at a bad time. It was late in the game, but, the Hoosiers, maybe that goes back to not stuffing the box to stop the run. They were not really bitten too much by the explosive play, which nowadays, whether it's in college football or the pros, is the name of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, at the end of the day, they got it, and they put themselves in a position to potentially go to a bowl game. And it's it's going to set Purdue and Indiana up to see if someone gets into the bowl game and someone doesn't. So show up to that game. We're probably going to talk about that next week. We're not going to get too much into it. Show up to the game. Buy tickets now. They have the buy one get one free thing. So if you were upset at ticket prices, not being a student coming in there, you get a buy one and get one free. I don't know the last time Indiana has given that kind of deal to any type of sporting event. So they want you to come. But let's roll over to the upcoming games for Indiana this week in terms of basketball, because they've got a couple key matchups, to say the least. You've got Marquette on Wednesday and then Arkansas on Sunday. So we're going to first go into Marquette. So it's going to be, at least for Indiana, it's going to be their game of the Gavitt tip-off games. Again, it's tomorrow or today, whenever you're listening to the podcast, Wednesday evening at 8:30 p.m. and it's on FS1. Currently, Marquette is ranked 24th in the AP polls, and they will be at least tomorrow. But at least for KenPom, they are currently ranked 28th when the time of this podcast is being recorded. They have been falling a little bit, but I think they'll probably stay at 28th. IU is 24th in KenPom as of Tuesday night. And over the past couple days, they actually have climbed the ladder a couple spots without doing anything. ESPN Matchup Predictor has IU at a 58% chance to win for 42% for Marquette. The line at the moment, and it's literally changed 10 times today already in the past 8 or so hours, but right now it's at 5.5 in Indiana's favor during the Tuesday evening when we're recording this podcast. Marquette, their first 2 games, they beat UMBC and Bethune-Cookman University, and they beat them by a lot. Not much to say there. So do you have any opening thoughts before we get into a couple of players for this Marquette matchup tomorrow evening or tonight, whenever you're listening?
I mean, I'm ready to get the show on the road. I've been excited for this game since the schedule was released. Look, ACC Big Ten Challenge is always is the traditional power conference, rivalry between the Big Ten and the ACC. These Gavitt games have been interesting the last few years. I remember IU, went on the road to Seton Hall last year. Tough game. They beat Creighton a few years ago. I mean, the Big East, especially with the new conference alignment, has really, sort of packed in a lot of quality basketball teams. And it really creates some fascinating matchups. As far as this specific game goes, I'm fired up. I mean, let's go. It's Assembly Hall. It's the best environment in college basketball. We're bringing in a top 25 opponent. I'm looking forward. I have no idea if this game's going to be a low-scoring defensive slugfest or 105 to 102. So let's see.
Yeah, and at least with Marquette's recent play, it's probably going to be more 100%, 100-point game.
Yeah.
But let's get into at least one of the players that will probably contribute to that potential 100-point game with Marcus Howard, one of the shorter 5'11 guards that, of course, if you've listened to even a little bit of any Indiana Marquette previews, you've heard about this kid. Through only 2 games, he's averages the most points, the most rebounds, the most assists on this very young season thus far. He's got 26 points per game. He's only in 29.5 minutes per game. He's not a big guy, so his rebounds, where he's averaging all those rebounds, it shows how resilient he is, how he puts himself in good positions on all sides of the ball. Archie said every perimeter guy, everyone on the team is also going to have to help try and guard him. But and I am going to give a shout out to Indiana HQ. Rob just put out a very extensive film room for Marcus Howard. So go check that out before the game or after the game. It's a lot of good stuff on him. But what are you seeing from Marcus Howard? How do you think Indiana is going to have to try and stop Marcus Howard basically as the entire Marquette team?
Yeah, look, I mean, you talk about baptism by fire here a little bit for Rob Finney. I think his defense has been a strong point so far, but again, it's been Chicago State and Montana State. I'm looking forward to seeing how Finney handles that. It's going to be tough for him as a freshman. Devontae Green, I believe Archie Miller said earlier today, is a game time decision. So if he's unable to go, now all of a sudden you're going to ask Finney among other guards. If Finney gets into foul trouble, I'm not sure really where you go. But as far as Howard goes, as you pointed out, the last couple of years, he has really not loaded up in the rebounds and the assist departments. He's been primarily a scorer. He's been great at it. He shot over 40% from 3, but all in all, I mean, he hasn't really been much of a rebounder, much of a distributor. That's changed so far. If this year's any indication, it looks like Marquette's coach, Steve Wojciechowski, has decided to hand the keys to the car to Marcus Howard. He's running the show there. If he doesn't like the shot he's taking, he's going to find an open guy down low on the wings or in the corners, and it just poses an even tougher defensive test for IU.
Yeah, and like I said, I'll go back to right now. He's again, it's only the first 2 games, and this is not going to hold true. But he is averaging the most points, the most rebounds, and the most assists on the team right now. So he is basically doing all of it. But for the rest of the team, if you know even a little bit about Marquette, you know how explosive their offensive is. You know how many threes they can shoot, how good their 3-point percentage is, just how many points they can basically score. But let's go with Sam Hauser, one of the 2 Hauser brothers, 6'8" forward, who's very efficient, averaging only about 12.5 points per game so far. But what are you seeing from Sam? And then why don't you talk a little bit about his brother, since they kind of have about the same game?
Yeah, I mean, look, Marcus Howard is Batman, Sam Hauser is Robin. I mean, this guy is a fantastic role player for this Marquette team. I mean, Marcus Howard's a good scorer. He'll hit you from outside. He'll drive past you to the rim. Sam Hauser in his freshman year shot 45% from 3. Last year, his sophomore year, shot 49%. I mean, I don't know if I could hit 1 out of every 2 threes with nobody guarding me. If I tried, somebody paid me to do it. If I practiced for 10 hours before I did it.
Let alone in the Big East.
Yeah, exactly. So, Sam Hauser's a junior. He's experienced. He's not afraid of a big environment like Assembly Hall will certainly be on Wednesday night. But again, this guy is absolutely lethal from 3. If he catches fire, I mean, Marquette does have the potential to put up a 100-burger on the Hoosiers defense. So, you're going to have to spend a lot of time focusing on those 2 guys, Sam Hauser and Marcus Howard. But as you mentioned, Sam's brother, Joey, he's a freshman, I believe. Mm-hmm. Again, like you said, same game. He did factor in the rebounding quite well in their last game. Now, again, opponent disclaimer there, but if you don't box him out, he'll find his way to the ball on both the offensive and defensive end. So, definitely that entire duo or trio that's the focus of the film sessions and the coaching sessions for the IU coaching staff these last 2 days.
Yeah, and for Joey, he is a top, basically a top 50, just outside of the top 50 recruit. And he's coming off the bench technically, as at least as of the first 2 games, but he's still clocking 25 minutes. So he and his brother are putting up a lot of good stuff. Brendan Bailey. Let's move on to another forward, 6'8". And if you listen to a lot of these heights and all the positions and everything that you're starting to listen to, they sound pretty familiar compared to IU. This Marquette team is very similar in terms of length and size. For IU, they've got a lot of length. They got a lot of bigs. They got a lot of forwards. They're going to use a lot of them. I don't think they're as deep as Indiana. And of course, tomorrow it's going to be a little different with injuries and everything. But why don't you talk a little bit about Brendan Bailey?
Yeah, and look, no, I mean, if you're going to point to a weakness on Marquette, especially in their starting five, I would say it's in their front court. And defensively, look, Bailey's a freshman. I'm not sure if he's ever faced a guy with the ability of Juwan Morgan or Justin Smith or Deron Davis, and Marquette, their depth is a little bit of a question mark. So I think one of the keys to the game tomorrow or Wednesday for IU is feed the ball to Juwan Morgan, feed the ball to Justin Smith, work the picks and the rolls, and if you get guys like Brendan Bailey into foul trouble, I think that's going to be a huge development for IU's chances of winning.
Mm-hmm. And a little bit about Brendan Bailey. You talked about the freshman. Yeah, he's technically a freshman. But he's been away from the game for 2 years. He was part of the 2016 recruiting class, and he's been on a mission trip for the last 2 years. So I'm not sure how much he could have been playing basketball every single day. I'm not sure, but we at least know that he hasn't been on a lot of formal teams and going up against a lot of big guys. So he really is kind of out of the game. He's a freshman, even if he took that mission trip in between his college career. He hasn't been playing against top-notch opponents. So he's unlike Arkansas, this is going to be the first big test for Marquette as well. So he's one of the guys that you're going to have to see how he's going to react to some of Indiana's strength and everything. Let's go to our last kind of starting lineup player, Sakar Anim. Is there anything who's a 6'5" forward, which is a relative term forward when you're 6'5", you're kind of both. Do you see anything from him? He's kind of he's not a standout player. He's kind of more of a role player. He is starting all the both games. He's getting a few minutes, but is there anything that we're going to look for out of Sakar?
Look, not too much. As you said, not really a standout player. Again, it's probably either Bailey or Anim. There's also Theo John who they might take out for Joey Hauser, who comes off the bench. So depending on how the game goes, we're gonna have to look out for that. Anim does like to take the three ball. So if it's one of those things. If you cover Howard, you cover Sam Hauser, and you cover Joey Hauser. Well, this guy might be able to catch fire from three if he's on his game on Wednesday night. So all in all, though, again, he's not the headliner. If IU's going to have to exploit some mismatches there if they want to come out on top.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of coming out on top, what do you think Indiana needs to do to beat this Marquette team? I think that the easy answer, of course, is coming down to defense. If this defense can slow down Marquette, because it's supposed to be Indiana's getting or at least building to try and be one of the better defenses in the country. And they're not there yet, but they're at least on the stepping ladder, close to being one of the better defenses. And their defense, like Archie said, is better than their offense. So that's the easy answer. But what else? What kind of matchups do you see that we have to do? What kind of schemes and everything is Indiana going to have to run to get to keep the win streak going at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I guess from a high level perspective, it's funny. The first 2 games of the year, I'm not sure there have been too many individual standouts or too many mismatches that IU has exploited to win games. It's been teamwork and chemistry on offense and cohesiveness on defense. And, that's the way we all like basketball to be played, right? As a team, we don't want guys to be standing out there dribbling for 30 seconds. of the shot clock and then hoisting up a desperation heave at the end or whatever. We tomorrow, Wednesday, the key for IU is going to be team defense and ball movement. And I think we've seen a good amount of that the first two games. So it's kind of the same usual stuff that we've seen the first two games, except it's going to be a significant elevation in the quality of the opponent. So, that's going to be what's needed. And, schematically, one thing that I've seen is I think if IU wants to win tomorrow on Wednesday, they've got to hit some threes. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be, a quantity, the number of attempts. But I think as far as, if you're going to take them, I think you've got to make them. So far, IU's three-point shooting has been a bit disappointing. Not too much has disappointed so far this year, but IU is 13 for 42 beyond the arc so far this year. That's 31%. As great as the first two games have gone, that's an area where the Hoosiers have to hit tomorrow.
Yeah, because even if you hit a couple threes, then they have to guard the three-pointer. You get to space out a little more, and when you get to space out this Hoosier team, you've got a plethora of people that can either bang down low or come in from the outside and get some of those more layup type of drives or everything. Because obviously you've got Juwan, you've got Justin. Even when you can throw the ball down to Duran for the limited minutes that he'll be able to play, you got those back to the basket or at least 2 feet from the basket players, and you've got kids like Romeo that can just drive in. And we've even seen Rob have a couple drives in. And if Devontae can go, he can do that kind of stuff. And you just got a lot of things that'll spread out if we can hit even a couple threes, which maybe we should give, if you're talking about hitting your threes, maybe you should have just Zach McRoberts. If you're going to take it, you're going to make it, because at least one kid has made the couple that he's taken, which hopefully he gets to go. He was, you mentioned Devontae is a game time decision. Zach is also a game time decision per Archie. As of today and last night. But let's move on to Arkansas, which will be this Sunday, November 18th at 3:30 p.m. on ESPN. So we've got a national televised, because technically FS1 is nationally televised, but I mean, we got the big guns for an ESPN game on Sunday. So it is in the middle of football, so I don't know how much you want to take away from that, but at least Arkansas is 53rd on Tuesday evening in KenPom. The ESPN Matchup Predictor has IU at a 59.3% chance to win against Arkansas's 40.7. The first two games for Arkansas this season, they lost the first game to number 27 in KenPom, Texas, in overtime by 2 points at the Armed Forces Classic. Then they beat a future Indiana opponent, well, very, very soon, actually, a future Indiana opponent with UC Davis, 81-58 at home. So the Arkansas actually had already a test at the beginning of the season. They opened the season up with a Texas team that is at least ranked just next to Indiana, more or less. So they've already had a little bit of a test. They lost in overtime. It was in a very weird situation, being on a ship and everything. But what are your opening thoughts for this Arkansas team and how Indiana is going to have to go on the road for their first, not only first road game, but it'll be a first true road test for the season?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that's something that's going to stand out. You're not in the Friendly Confines Assembly Hall anymore. You're not playing at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. You're not playing at the United Center. You're playing on campus. It's going to be a hostile crowd. As it's a rare matchup for Arkansas. This is a traditional basketball powerhouse coming down to Arkansas to face them. As much as Marquette will probably be a test for Indiana's perimeter defense on Wednesday, I think the matchup against Arkansas will be finding out how the post guys do, because you're going to go up against Daniel Gafford, who for most of last year was considered a shoo-in for the NBA draft. Everyone expected him to be a prospect in the lottery. As someone who's a Bulls fan, I was tracking mock drafts all year last year, given the Bulls win-loss record. And every single time I refreshed the thing, it looked like, almost the majority of mock drafts were thinking, hey, maybe Daniel Gafford might go to the Bulls. He's a tall, athletic center. But he did decide to return to Arkansas for his sophomore season. And against Texas, he was fantastic. He 20 and 12, 8 for 15 from the floor. He's going to be a real test for guys like Juwan Morgan and Justin Smith, and to the extent he can play Deron Davis. Plus, he's going to have the home crowd behind him. So Gafford's he's the guy you underline, you highlight, you asterisk, you circle, because he is the alpha on that team, and you've got to find a way to stop him.
Yep. And besides him, so for some of my opening thoughts, this is a very, and I'm going to bold, italicize, underline, whatever you can do, very young team. As everyone's been saying, basically since we found out that we had this home and home series with Arkansas, they've got no seniors on the team, not even any walk-ons, 0 seniors. They've got 1 scholarship junior, and then in addition to that, they've got 1 junior sitting out for a transfer, so can't play, and then another walk-on. But they've only got 1 true junior, which he's starting. But that's it. Then they go to 4 scholarship sophomores and 8 freshmen. That's like think about that. You've got 4 sophomores and then 8 freshmen, making up literally like 90 whatever percent of this team. So they're a very, very young team. They've got potential to be a pretty decent team, but they like to recruit in Arkansas as they should. But really, half of their team is from Arkansas. So good for them that they're getting those in-state players. But those in-state players aren't really the cream of the crop. Most of their recruits are in the 100-plus rankings for recruiting, all except for Gafford, as Nathan obviously just talked about. And as everyone knows, he was 39th last year in 24/7, and his stock has even gone way far up since then. Their starters are, first of all, really the only people that play during the game, especially even during the first 2 games that they've had. You've seen against Texas, all 5 starters played at least 33 minutes, and then it went all the way up to 39, where Jalen Harris played almost the 100% of the game. So that part is not similar to IU, but what is very similar to IU, their size again is pretty similar. They've with length and everything. So we're going to go through their team and give you some of the size matchups and some of the positions and everything, but they're very similar to Indiana size wise. If Indiana is injury ridden, which they probably will be on Sunday, depending on how bad, you are looking at about the same amount of depth as well for this specific team. If Indiana can't get a few of their players back, they go to about 9 players deep. Arkansas does. And then like Marquette, they do actually have a couple good 3-point shooters, which are some freshmen. So we don't have a lot of statistics on them to see if they can keep it up. But let's start with the point guard, basically, of the team. Jalen Harris, he's a redshirt sophomore guard, 6'2", so not too tiny, but on the smaller side, I guess a little average for college. He doesn't score very much, and he's not a very good shooter. He's 4 or 8 from 2s, and then 0 for 6 from 3, which all averages about to a 0.222% shooting percentage, which is pretty bad. But he is a very traditional point guard. Which when I mean by that, he likes to he's not the guy that scores when he brings the ball up. He likes to find and create plays. He's the only starter not averaging double figures in scoring. He's got the most assists on the team. He gets a few steals, and that's where I mean more traditional. Find the open guy, create plays for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jalen Harris, he's a guy who as we kind of see with this Indiana team, you don't necessarily have to have 5 all-stars in your starting lineup in order to win in this game. So Harris is going to be a guy that he's going to be trying to sneak around Juwan Morgan and Justin Smith inside, trying to poke the ball away. He's going to try to set up Gafford inside and a couple of these other starters that we'll mention shortly. A guy like Isaiah Joe, who's an excellent 3-point shooter. So, he may not be a star. He may not be in the NBA. Who knows? But in the college game, he might be. Especially you mentioned, he's the junior on this team. He's the guy who a lot of the other starters could absolutely look to kind of provide leadership or experience.
Sophomore, but almost the same thing.
Right. Yeah. So he's going to be the guy that they look to sort of help them try to win this game on Sunday.
You talked about Isaiah Joe, so let's go to Isaiah Joe, which is a interesting name. Isaiah Joe, 2 first names. Freshman guard, again, another freshman. All of these, except for Adrio Bailey, they're all going to be freshmen or sophomore. So freshman, 6'5". He is a 3-point shooter. He's shooting pretty well over 400 from beyond the arc. And then, like I said earlier, except for Jalen Harris, every other starter is averaging double figures. So this is a pretty well-rounded starting lineup. So what are you seeing from Isaiah Joe, and how are the Hoosiers going to have to match up with him?
Yeah, I mean, he might be a freshman. This kid has talent. He's a 4-star. He's a 4-star recruit. He was someone offered by Alabama. Look, teams, high power conference teams wanted him. He's not shy. He might be a freshman. He's averaging 6.5 threes a game attempted. So if you give him space, he's not going to hesitate to shoot the basketball. So perhaps some of the stuff that IU learns these last few days, IU has learned these last few days scouting Marcus Howard, they might be able to apply to Isaiah Joe.
Yep, and it'll be for everyone too, because it's not just Isaiah Jones. Mason Jones, the next guy we're going to talk about, can also shoot the ball. So it's really going to have to be, we're not going to say, and this is not the case, but say Rob Finney was the most lockdown guard defender that we have. It's not like he's going to be the only one trying to get everyone. It's going to have to be a team effort guarding on the perimeter, and then all the stuff down low, especially with Gafford, because they're going to be able to space the floor like we talked about for Marquette. They've got that big guy and they've got that perimeter shooting, so everyone's going to have to really be on their toes for those 3 balls coming from Isaiah Joe. And then Mason Jones, who is a sophomore guard. He's 6'5", again, so one of those bigger guards, which is the same height-ish as Romeo, if you want a little bit of a reference. He is a JUCO transfer, so he didn't come into college as a highly touted guy, but he, of course, if he already transferred from JUCO to a Power 5 team in 1 year, he must have had a very successful freshman season at JUCO. Again, he's another 3-point shooter. He's tied for most total points on the team thus far in 2 games, but really all 4 of these, except for Harris, all 4 of these starters have scored 28 to 32 points. So he's technically tied for the top. He does average 7 rebounds per game thus far, though. So he's really getting a lot of those boards right under Daniel Gafford, who's obviously the guy getting the most, but he's really getting he's scoring a lot and he's getting a lot of rebounds, which there's a huge place for you on any basketball team if you can do those 2 things.
For sure, and I was just gonna point that out. I mean, he had 6 boards against Texas, 8 boards against UC Davis. Simply put, you're gonna have to put a body on him in order to secure the basketball after getting a stop. So you can go the other way. Again, you mentioned the size, 6'5" from a guard. Nowadays, with these small ball lineups and your stretch 4s and all that, this guy's he's almost like a forward. I mean, that 6'5" size, is nothing to sneeze at. So definitely a guy you're going to have to locate on your box outs, on your rebounds, so you can score points on the other side of the court.
Mm-hmm. And then your Gafford is partly a leader, but really your Juwan Morgan type of leader, Adrio Bailey. He's the like I said, the only junior that right. This is the junior. You're forward, 6'6", which is probably a little tiny, but he's he's a guy that's going to be on the floor. He's the most efficient guy on the team thus far. He's making just about 70% of his shots, which is great. That's the kind of stats that you saw Duran like his freshman year and Thomas Bryant in his freshman year and all of these great statistical stuff. He's shooting that well, at least in 2 games. With 2s, again, scoring in double figures, getting a few rebounds, not too much, nothing spectacular, but like I said, really his role is kind of being a leader on this team, literally being the only upperclassman.
Yeah, look, you're gonna have to focus on other guys here, but Bailey is someone who you're gonna have to find a way to locate him again, and look. If Gafford, for some reason, gets into foul trouble for Arkansas, maybe all of a sudden he becomes the primary post presence for Arkansas on Sunday. So, you definitely have to keep an eye on him. You're definitely going to have to scout him. But, again, you're probably going to have to end up paying more attention to other key players on that Arkansas team.
And we got Desi Stills, top 50 recruit, who's a freshman. Going to see a little bit of minutes, but really let's wrap up our Arkansas, or at least the very end of our Arkansas talk, with Daniel Gafford. Doc already talked a little bit about him. Sophomore, like you said, came back for his sophomore season, 6'11", so he's a real big guy, real athletic guy. He doesn't miss too many shots because they're all down low. He hasn't attempted a 3-pointer yet. Averaging 8 rebounds a game so far. Already has 6 blocks total. But the one thing, but before I turn it over to you, that we can take advantage of, at least so far, and even against subpar opponents, which is even bigger, he does turn the ball over, and he turns it over a lot. He gave up the ball 6 times each against Texas and then UC Davis. So he's already turned the ball over 12 times in 2 games. So that's the one thing that we should hopefully try and take advantage of against Daniel Gafford.
Yeah, that's a bit surprising to see out of a big man. We kind of said, oh, he hits a lot of his shots because a lot of them are taken down low. I'm surprised that we're seeing a high number in the turnover column from him. The one other thing that I kind of noticed from really the start of his time at Arkansas was that he struggles from the free throw line, and in fact, that's kind of a consistent theme for Arkansas. Gafford specifically is hovering just above 50% each of the last. He was 53% his freshman year. He's 55 and change this season. So if worse comes to worse, you don't concede the easy layup or dunk. Try to hack him. Try to get him to the line as long as you're not in serious foul trouble. Arkansas as a whole has really struggled from the charity stripe. They're 40 for 65 this year, good for 62%, 61.5 to be exact. We know that's been a bit of a bugaboo for IU in the first 2 games this year as well. So, if it becomes a foul shooting contest, I think that's something where you've got to watch out for. Maybe that's something you focus on after this game against Marquette on Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. If you struggle against Marquette, you've got to figure out this free throw thing before taking on Arkansas Sunday.
And let's wrap up our Arkansas preview before we get to a couple listener questions. We'll wrap it up with a listener question, which we talked a little bit about this, but I guess as a general, a couple comments, let's talk a little bit about IU. So Respectable Adam asked, how does IU match up against Arkansas? Don't know much about them. And you're right, Respectable Adam. We all don't know much about them because they're so young and they haven't played a lot together. So that's definitely, everyone's looking to see what they can do. But at least from an Indiana perspective, how are they going to match up? In a brief, quick thing, how do you see Indiana matching up against Arkansas?
Yeah, in a nutshell, Gafford is the star of the show. So, as like I kind of mentioned, as much as perimeter defense will be the story against Marquette, your interior defense, your rebounding will be the story against Arkansas. They've got to focus on that Sunday.
Yeah, I like it. Let's go on to the next question from Ben on Twitter. What are the chances that we go bowling at 5-7? So, of course, an Indiana football question. A few teams do sometimes go to a bowl game at 5-7, and my thoughts on this are, I think they're pretty slim. 0 teams in 2017 went that went 5-7 went on to go to a bowl game. In 2016, 2 teams did go to a bowl game at 5-7, Mississippi State and North Texas. Now, honestly, I'm not sure why North Texas got in that year because they didn't beat anyone at all. They lost a few games by a lot of points. So that's the one that puzzles me. But Mississippi State did beat number 7 Texas A&M. A lot of their lost games were really close games. So really, if you're going to go 5-7, you got to have some big wins. And of course, Indiana has not put up those big wins. And then again, also, out of 5 places that I looked at bowl projections, 0 of them had Indiana on them, meaning that everyone thinks that Purdue is going to win that last game. So which we're talking about Purdue, Indiana losing out and still going bowling. And even if they do lose, everyone thinks that Indiana is not going to get in. Now, one of those sites didn't have either Purdue or Indiana on them, which literally makes no sense whatsoever because that game, someone's going to get to 6 wins, but that's besides the point. Do you think, what are the chances that was what he asked? What are the chances that we go bowling at 5-7?
Slim to none. I mean, as you mentioned last year, 0 teams made it. Beat Purdue. Noah, beat Purdue. I mean, look,
Yep.
Figure out, look, this game on Saturday is going to be obviously a really tough test against Michigan. Learn from your mistakes against the Wolverines. Make sure you carry over what you did well against Michigan and really put it to the test the following Saturday against Purdue. Look, they beat us last year in their place in the same circumstances. So if Purdue falls to Wisconsin this coming weekend, you're return the favor. Show them what's up. Look, if IU gets 5 wins, look, it's still a bit of a fluid situation. We'll see what the results of the games are this weekend before we really dive in and figure out what could possibly be IU's percentage of making a bowl game with 5 wins. But beat Purdue, get the 6, play a postseason game. I think that's what we all want.
Yeah, don't put yourself in that position because any given year, like you said, last year, 0 teams could go in. Like 3 years ago, like 3 or 4 teams went in. So
it's nothing. Yeah,
it's not. Yeah, so you can't really predict it. Don't put yourself there. But if I were to bet, even if 4 or 5, 5 and 7 teams went in, I think Indiana wouldn't be one of them. But let's get on to our last question before we wrap it up. Frame by Frame Hoops on Twitter said, "Who has been your Indiana men's basketball MVP so far?" Which I think is actually an interesting question because the first game you had someone like Romeo that was lights out shooting, but then the second game you had Juwan that was kind of the clear guy that took over for the team. So I think it's an interesting question because there hasn't really been one guy at least both games. So for both games wrapped up, who has been your basketball MVP so far?
I like the question, first of all. We should have MVP of the week, MVP of the game every 2 games. We should update the standings or something. Look, I guess from a statistical standpoint, I think I'm gonna lean with Juwan Morgan. Like you said, it's close. He's basically close to a double-double, 11.5 points, 9.5 boards through the first 2 games. But again, I like what I'm seeing from everyone so far. And while I understand the opponent disclaimer is there, I find myself watching the 40 minutes against Chicago State and the 40 minutes against Montana State, and I'm saying there's really not too much that's bugging me right now outside of the shaky free throw shooting, the shaky 3-point shooting. But as far as their effort, their intensity, their discipline, their fundamentals, I like what I'm seeing as far as all of that is concerned. But if I had to pick one through the first week of the season, I guess I would lean slightly towards Juwan Morgan. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I was actually going to say we did not correlate this beforehand on purpose. And I was going to say Juwan for almost the exact same reasons too, because his first game wasn't the best. And Matt and I even on this podcast said that he didn't have the best game. And that's not to Juwan's not going to be a guy that's going to have a few bad games. You're allowed to have a bad game every once in a while. But he still got 8 rebounds and 9 points that first game, and he got that double-double the second game, and he was that clear MVP against Montana State. And as your leader of the team, he should be your overall MVP. He doesn't have to be the best scorer, but he's that guy that's going to really get it done when you really need it to. And of all the guys on the team, maybe even a little bit compared to Romeo in those big games, you're going to want Juwan Morgan to have the ball to try and end a lot of those games, put those close games away. And I hope it is Juwan at least going down the road, because then we see that Juwan is living up to the expectation that he has. But that about wraps it up for our 60-second show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. I will be back this Friday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off. Make sure to stay tuned through updates on Twitter at the Hoosier Sound. Subscribe to us on YouTube or however you listen to podcasts, and visit our website at thehoosiersound.com to find all of our information in one place. As always, send us your questions as the audience. Be sure to comment, chat, or send us a message at contact@thehoosiersound.com on what questions you have, and we'll get them on our next episode. Lastly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. It really, really helps so that we can grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.